Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 17th of March, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have Ben Rubin with me in the studio. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Brian.
And we are very pleased today to also be joined by Diane Rasmussen-McCaddy, who will be joining us by link from Scotland. And we also have a guest presenter today, Jobs Langgreber, doctor, who is a visiting professor with the University of Lugano in Switzerland. I think we're going to have a really fascinating news because there are so many important things happening on a world stage. We'll see whether we can get to grips with those today. We're going to kick off by inviting the audience to go back in time to 2013 in particular. And this is when the UK column had started to warn about the British government's use of applied behavioural psychology. This was the Express headline, "Nudge Unit to become a business." And we said that the Conservatives had unleashed an applied behavioural psychology program on the public, boasting, and that is absolutely correct, boasting that they could change our views and values. Well, it was really only the UK column that was warning about the brainwashing aspect, and I'm going to qualify that description in just a moment. But of course, where the public need to go, if you've no idea what we're talking about, is the Mindspace document that was published by the Cabinet Office back in 2010, Mindspace influencing behaviour through public policy. And if I bring in a bit of detail on this, David Halpin was the key man. And if you have a look at what's on screen at the moment, so he was the chief strategist at the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit between 2001 and 2007. So this use of applied psychology to help a political agenda came from within the Cabinet Office. But look at the sort of people who were involved. Ivo Flaev, who was senior lecturer in psychology at the Faculty of Medicine at Imperial College London. So senior people. But where the real dangers lie was actually, and I think quite remarkably, set out in the Mindspace document itself. Let's bring this bit up on screen, highlight it. It says the potential for controversy. Policymakers know that attempts to change citizens' behaviour may well be controversial. And so therefore, the public should be consulted. Well, of course, the public weren't consulted. And then we see here the absolute danger in what they're doing, because it talks about automatic effects on people. Here it says a lack of conscious control also has implications for consent and freedom of choice. So these people using a weapon, which means that the public may not fully realise that their behaviour is being changed, or at least how it's being changed. And I look at the audience today and I say, do you really trust any politician that's in Westminster at the moment, either or any party? Do you trust those people to change your behaviour in a way you don't even realise that your mind is being changed? This is, Ben, this is shocking stuff, even when you go back and have a look. Now, following the 2010 reports, the Behavioural Insights team, who was the government's core, I'm going to call them brainwashing team, they produced another report here, Behavioural Government, using behavioural science to improve how governments introduce their policy. And if the audience wants to know what we're really talking about, then no better place to go than lockdown, when the government scientific team of SAGE, backed up by SPI-B, and this included psychological experts, minuted a meeting where it was talking about amazing things. It was talking about using education to change the way people behaved, using persuasion, using an incentivization system, and here is one of the really dangerous ones, coercing people into doing what the government wanted and enabling and facilitating other parts of the program. And under persuasion, The remarkable sentence is here: the perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased amongst those who are complacent, using hard-hitting emotional messaging. This was effectively saying we're going to use fear in order to get the public to do as we tell them. Ben, incredible stuff, isn't it, when you see it in black and white like this?
It is incredible stuff, and it's absolutely everywhere in the system. Actually, I remember being in the advertising industry when the Mindspace document landed back in 2010, and when the ad agencies got their hands on that, they essentially turned themselves into the behaviour change industry. It's actually how they talk about it.
Yes. Okay, well, let's move on to the present day, and this is the headline. Now, this actually started to happen at the end of 2024, but it's rolling. It's a steamroller in 2025 in Starmer's government, and basically a new media unit has been set up with virtually a £700,000 budget, as we're going to see lots of money available. Now, this is one of the key men who's mentioned in regard to heading up Keir Starmer's Downing Street operation. And the best we can say about this man is we don't know anything about him. We don't know anything about the thousands of other unelected and unaccountable people, but should we trust him? Now, in respect of the new media unit, this is what Keir Starmer had to say. The way people consume information has changed. If we're going to rebuild trust, we need to meet people where they are on the platforms they use. Interesting admission by Keir Starmer that the politicians, and that includes himself, people do not trust them. He goes on to say this will bring together data analysts, creative content producers, and paid media specialists to reach and connect with the public in a much more effective way. But what does he really mean? Well, this is what I think he's talking about. And these are my words: our propaganda and psychological reframing program, but the legacy media, the mainstream media, is failing. We need to spread our propaganda to the social media channels. And we'll add a bit to that. The social media channels are where people are watching and listening to real news and analysis. And we, the new Labour government, have to disrupt this. So that is what I think that Keir Starmer is really talking about. But if we get deeper into proper detailed analysis, we can have a look at this parliamentary website, which is talking about questions that have been asked. And in June 2021, the question was being asked about a spend of almost £236.5 million on 1,500 people who were part of the government's policy objectives. So these were people using these techniques in order to produce policy that the public were going to accept. And then in this part of the text, I'm just going to read part of the screen. It is impossible to tell from the annual report and accounts how much support in terms of staff and budget is dedicated to the Prime Minister. So we don't even know where this money is going. And disaggregating support for the Prime Minister and the rest of the government would not fully resolve the problems of transparency and accountability we've highlighted. And if I do the last one here, this is wrong. It undermines both ministerial accountability to Parliament and collective responsibility on the part of the Cabinet. So we are not allowed to know what the government is doing, but what we do know is the government is using pretty vicious applied psychology to change the way we think and behave, and we're not even going to know. Now, one of the problems at the moment is that even the Lords, never mind the members of Parliament themselves, the Lords don't really understand what's happening. This is a question from Lord Alton of Liverpool, and he was asking His Majesty's government whether the new media unit based in the Cabinet Office and the individuals within it, including the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, have an exemption to use TikTok on government devices. Now, the problem is he doesn't even know the right question to ask because he's heard about TikTok and the Chinese, so he probably thinks this is a security issue, but actually this is to do with a constitutional issue where the government is working to attack its own citizens. And the reply from Baroness across is particularly revealing because she says the policy on the use of TikTok on government devices hasn't changed. She must have been very happy because essentially there was a question which was irrelevant. She didn't have to worry about the response. But if we sum up here, even the Institute of Government in its latest reports is saying that it really can't unravel the secret workings of the state, and it's running conferences to try and ascertain how it works. But if we look at the Behavioural Insights team itself, they claim that they're independent now. But if we look at the website, they're independent and partners of the Cabinet Office. So that does not appear to be true. And this is very telling. If we look at where they're now operating in the world, let's expand that on screen. So the black is Behavioural Insights team projects, the dark blue is offices, and the light blue is local staff presence. What started in British government now spread across the world. And interestingly, in Europe, the two key offices are in UK and France. And I'm specifically going to say that is because that the government here was working with Sarkozy's expert on brainwashing way back in 2012, 2015. So Germany was left out, although we can see that Germany is being used for applied behavioural psychological experiments. And on that note, I'd like to welcome our guest presenter today, Jobst Landgräber. And Jobst, thank you very much for agreeing to join the UK column. And I think you've got a really important segment today on changes that are possible changes to the German constitution. Welcome.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So what I'm going to show you is a change of the constitution that is going to happen probably tomorrow, and which is in a way set up in a very problematic manner. So recently we had a re-election of our parliament, of our lower house, which is the one that makes the relevant legislative decisions. And you see, these are the new seat distribution that you have here. And basically the CDU, which is comparable to the Tories, and the SPD, which is comparable to Labour, they want to form a new coalition, and they will also have a slight majority together. The main opposing parties is the blue segment here, which is the AfD, which has no equivalent in England, but is comparable to the French Rassemblement National. And then you have here this magenta-colored segment. This is the lefty party, which are Marxists, which is the heir of the former SED, which was the political party of Eastern Germany. And these are the main opposition parties, whereas the black, green, and red segment basically form a bloc that is rather uniform in its political intentions. So that means that these two parties, the CDU and the SPD, only have now a normal majority, but no qualified majority. But they would like to increase the deficit spending in Germany and issue a new package of 900 billion euro of additional debt. So just to give you a feeling, Germany now has around 2.5 trillion of debt. So 900 billion additional is 30% increment of debt, which is an unprecedented debt increment in one step. And this is unconstitutional according to our current constitution. In the all parliament, the CDU, the SPD and the Greens together have a 2/3 majority to change the constitution and to therefore enable this law to go through and to then create this huge pile of additional debt. However, in the new parliament that was voted end of February, they don't have this 2/3 majority anymore. There they are only 30 seats or 40 seats below it, because the two oppositional parties, AfD and Left Party, they have more than 1/3 of the votes together. Therefore, they are now have asked for an emergency assembly of the old parliament, despite the fact that it has been voted out, so that they can now change the constitution and use the old majority to vote for a constitutional change that will free their ability to issue new debt. And basically, to do this, they claimed an emergency because they say that we have a defense emergency in Germany that is necessary, so that it is necessary to spend hundreds of billions for defense spending and also on infrastructure. And this is unprecedented in the history of Germany since World War II. And so despite the parliament being voted out, it's now assembling one more time merely to bring through this constitutional stage a change. And this is, of course, raising a lot of alarm in Germany. And what can the opposition do? So the first option was an intervention by the Constitutional Court to stop this assembly. But it failed last Friday. The court ruled that the old assembly is still in charge and free to change the constitution, which is a formalistic approach, but from a legalistic perspective, probably all right. So this has failed. Now, the only thing that the opposition can do is try to convince members of parliament of the future coalition to vote against the constitutional change in the old assembly, which is what they're trying to achieve now. But it's unlikely they need to convince 30 MPs of doing this, and we don't know whether this is likely to succeed. So this means that it's very likely that this debt package will be made possible. What are the details? So because the equivalent of the Tory and the Labour Party both need the Green Party, because only with the help of the Greens they will have 2/3 of the votes, they have amended the package to change the constitution to include the main goals of the Greens. Here on the screen you can see two of their leaders, and so they will now make climate protection a constitutional goal. That means that the climate protection will be enshrined as a goal of German state in the constitution, and also 100 billion euro of the spending package will have to be spent for climate change mitigation. And this was, of course, added to obtain agreement by the Green Party. So despite the fact that the Green Party is not going to be a member of our parliament anymore, it is now very, very influential. So it obtains a change to the constitution that it has fought for since many years. And basically now the main instrument for this change of the society towards deindustrialization is now part of our constitution. What are the consequences of this? So on the background of the screen, you see the 10-year bond yield curve, the interest rates that have to be paid on government bonds in the European Union, and the figures for Germany are at the moment still quite the same. So you see that at the beginning of COVID, there was quite an increase. In the middle of COVID, they had to increase quite massively the interest rate payments on the bonds because the massive deficit spending that was done in that time made the markets fearful of defaults in the Eurozone. And so you can already see that we have had quite a massive increase in interest rates. And it is very likely that we'll have another increase in interest rates due to this issuing of massive debt. The second, and it will lead to a 90% of GDP, debt to GDP ratio in Germany, which is then getting very close to United States, for example. It will lead to higher inflation, increased taxation and high interest rates. And the euro as a currency will become even more unstable because it endangers the credit rating of the last country guaranteeing its existence. That credit rating is declining now, and this is very dangerous for the euro. So the last aspect, let's review how the German media see this. So this is all in German, what you're going to see now, but mainly they are euphoric. So Tagesschau, which is like BBC, says the financial package stands or is established. ZDF, which is also like BBC, says that the road for the new debt package has been freed. They don't call it debt package, but financial package, so it's a big debt package. Another radio station like BBC says that economists are in favor of this agreement, and the Süddeutsche Zeitung, leading newspaper, applauds that now the billions have been made freed up for defense and infrastructure. So you can see that though there's huge skepticism in the German population and many commentators, our media are enthusiastically in favor of this whole manipulation of our constitution.
Jobs, thank you very much for taking us through that. And I particularly picked up the fact you said these are changes the like of which have not been seen since the Second World War, well, the lead up to the Second World War, I think you mean on this. So these are very serious things that are happening, and a government which has been voted out. Correct me if I haven't got this quite right, but a government in Germany is voted out, and then before they let their hands go from the levers of power, they're going to bring in this massive, massive change. And they're going to look the public in the eye and say, this is constitutional and you need to accept it. Is the German public reacting, even if the German mainstream media is supporting it?
Yeah, so first of all, it's not the government, but the parliament. So because at the moment we still have the old government, but it's not the main actor, but the main actor is actually are the two parties that try to form a new coalition. And to form this coalition, they need to do deficit spending because that's the only way to get agreement on many topics. So they want to cover their disagreement by spending a lot of money. And that's why they need this constitutional change, but they use the old parliament to make the change. Now, how is the public reacting? Well, the alternative media are scared, they are fuming, they're commenting very negatively. Many economists are commenting in a negative way, but there are also the government economic commentators which are close to the government who, of course, applaud this. But I think there's a lot of disagreement with this in the German public.
Okay, Jobs, thank you very much for that. Now, you've kindly agreed to join us for UK Column Extra today. And so we'll have a much deeper discussion about these factors and also what's happening in UK. But thank you very much for joining us today for that segment. Well, Ben, really, what better place to go than big money power and the hedge funds?
Absolutely, yeah. Dirty money in Germany, dirty money in the UK. And we're going to have a look at how international investors and algorithmic trading companies in the City of London are pumping millions of pounds into the UK political system in order to create and capture a £1 trillion marketplace in climate technology. And we're going to start by looking at this organisation. This is Quadrature, a technology business that takes trading positions determined by statistical models to generate returns on its own proprietary capital. They use algorithms to trade with their own money to make essentially perpetual profits, like a money printing machine. They call it the ultimate automated trading business. And you'll notice, if you're paying attention to the video running on screen, there are no people in the video on their website. That's quite interesting, very telling. They do actually have a few employees. They've got just over 200 employees. They're based in the City of London, right next to the Gherkin, and they pay their people an average of £3.6 million a year each in 2022. Right, so they're generating an enormous amount of money. They're incredibly opaque. So both technologically, they run a black box trading system. We don't understand how this thing operates in the background. Financially, it's based in the Cayman Islands, so it's in a tax haven. And culturally, it's described by the people in industry as a bit of a cult. Right, so this is quite an interesting term to use when talking about an organisation like this. The cult is led by these two. So this is Greg Skinner and Sunil Setia, who are big-time maths and science guys. One studied mathematics, one studied physics, Cambridge and Manchester University, respectively. They've been working in the city for the past 30 years. They set Quadrature up about 15 years ago. And interestingly, they receive no salaries from the business, but instead they've taken a combined total of about £160 million in low interest loans from the company in order to drastically reduce the amount of income tax that they have to pay, which makes them perfect candidates to make huge donations to the Labour Party. And last year, they gave £4 million to Labour. It's the largest ever donation that has been given to the Labour Party in its entire history. And this was particularly interesting. This report here from Open Democracy came in September, and they revealed that the Labour received the donation in the 1 week window between the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announcing the general election and the start of the pre-poll reporting period, in which all political donations over £11,180 had to be published weekly rather than the quarterly norm. So essentially, they've made this donation deliberately in that period to avoid scrutiny ahead of the election. I think we have to assume that Starmer et al., the whole Labour apparatus, would have known about this. I can't say whether it was their choice to do so or not, but...
Well, the minimum is they could have declared it to the public so that it was made highly visible to the public. And of course, that didn't happen, in line with my opening segment today, where Starmer and his team do not want to tell the public how they're even running the government. So
exactly,
a lot of questions, Ben.
4 million straight into the Labour Party, and then what else is Quadrature doing with the money? It's putting tens, hundreds of millions into this thing. This is the Quadrature Climate Foundation. The new climate reality demands unprecedented climate action. We're very familiar with all this stuff. And what are they up to? So they say that their work has a global focus. Since launching in 2019, we've committed more than $1 billion to more than 180 organizations in 17 countries advancing climate solutions around the world. This includes donations to the United Nations, the London School of Economics, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, the World Economic Forum, the Bureau for Investigative Journalism, interestingly. So they're funding the people that are supposed to be investigating them. No conflict of interest there at all. And also Apolitical Foundation, who I'll come back to a little bit later. Now, all this climate stuff, you could present this potentially as being altruistic. They want to fix the problems of the world. But unfortunately, I'm a bit more cynical. And actually, the actions of the founders suggest that that's not what's going on here at all, because Greg Skinner at the start of this year acquired a 50% stake in Ethical Power Group, right, which is a UK business actually based in Exeter, just down the road. And they've already got 14 projects up and running across the UK. It's solar energy. You can see the image just popping in at the bottom of the frame there. And his money includes a £15 million working capital loan to support the growth of this organisation in the UK market and internationally. So the Quadrature Fund, one of the owners, has got a vested interest in the commercial growth and development of the market that his charitable fund is promoting, is pushing the agenda for.
Sounds par for the course.
Absolutely. And what else has he got from his money from the Labour government? Well, quite a lot, actually. So the UK Climate Envoy, so our top international voice, talking about climate issues. This lady, Rachel Kite, former World Bank climate chief, was put into position in September, right? So Quadrature have had put a load of money in. There's this appointment is made, and she's actually a trustee of the Quadrature Climate Foundation. So she's on the board, and she hasn't resigned that position. Yeah, so she's still a trustee while operating in that capacity for the British government. And Quadrature have also put a lot of money, as we're about to find out, into Apolitical Foundation in order to retrain UK government officials to make them more amenable to the climate agenda. Let's hear it from Lisa Witter now.
Jeremy Oppenheim announced that the Quadrature Climate Foundation has awarded the Government Climate Campus. Robin told you a little bit about that. Pooja told you a little bit about that, which was named as one of Fast Company's most innovative ideas in the world, which we're really proud of. $1 million grant to train 25,000 policymakers. You know, we like to work at the whole stack of government, as we say, from the national down to the very local where those shovels hit the ground.
Astonishing. I'm going to say astonishing, Ben, because she is really telling us what's going on. So when she's talking about training, what she really means is reframing. Remember, the government is using applied psychology to change the way people think without them knowing what's being done. That's the technology being used in courses. And then she says something very important there, down to the level, the bottom level shovels on the ground. they need people at local level to implement their policies, because if people at local level do not implement the policies, this game is all over. So if you're watching today's news thinking, my goodness, what can we do? It is so easy. You say no to the policy at local level.
100%. That's the Achilles heel of the whole thing, right? So that's Lisa Witter. We've talked about Lisa Witter a lot. A young global leader of the World Economic Forum. She's one of the chiefs of Apolitical Foundation, who are in the process right now of retraining, reframing UK government, global governments. They're in 170 countries. One of the primary mechanisms for the Great Reset agenda to be driven down into nation states, right? That's what she's up to. And she mentioned a few things, which I'm going to unpick. So first one was this guy, Jeremy Oppenheim. Right, so he started off as a senior economist at the World Bank back in the 80s. He then spent 23 years at McKinsey, becoming ultimately their senior partner for sustainability. McKinsey, one of the top tier global strategy firms and a strategic partner of the World Economic Forum. And for the past 9 years, he's been a partner and now recently become managing partner of Systemic, which is a blended advisory and investment firm whose purpose is to create disruptions in the world's critical economic systems. That's literally how they describe what they do. And that's capital and ideas, particularly focused around food, energy, all of the industrial transformations that we've been talking about. And what he doesn't have listed on his LinkedIn profile is this role. So he's a co-chair of the advisory board at the Quadrature Climate Foundation. And as Lisa Witter just told us, they put $1 million to retrain 25,000 policymakers into this thing, which is the Government Climate Campus. This is one of the apolitical flagship programs. So they talk about building energy and climate capable governments this decade, an ambitious global partnership hosted by Apolitical to rapidly upskill whole government workforces with the energy, climate and nature training needed for impactful actions. People got to take action. Quadrature are behind it, but also Bezos, Earth Fund, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office. So UK government is absolutely at the centre of this global transition process. And what are they training people on? So if you go and look at the website, we'll provide some links. You can see that the agenda for the Climate Campus is climate change and health, climate change and mental health. They love to tie all these things together, centering equity in climate action. So there's very much this kind of neo-Marxist dynamic to this, but the leveling out of living standards artificially, internationally, climate finance, green growth, and an introduction to the energy transition, which is an energy transition based on energy systems sold by people like Greg Skinner, who is behind the Quadrature Climate Foundation, and then ultimately paid for through taxation, through money printing, like Jobs was talking about earlier on, but then also through loans from people like Jeremy Oppenheim at Systemic. And crucially, as Brian's pointed out, the final quote there in the video was that we like to work at every level, from national to very local, where those shovels hit the ground. And just to reinforce Brian's excellent point, if we want to stop this thing in its tracks, then that's where we need to focus our energy, and it's actually where we can get the most traction. So
people can do things, and it does make a difference, and all it requires is 2 or more of you to get together and to take that action at local level. But it's very clear Starmer is also now having to admit that they're beginning to lose control of the narrative, and that means more of the applied psychology from within Parliament, but also, of course, more censorship of free speech. And I have no doubt that Ofcom is one of the tools that's going to be used to do that. No doubt we'll be speaking about that a bit more in the near future. If you like what UK Column does, please support us. If you value us, support us, make a donation, or join us with a monthly or an annual membership or a lifetime membership. And of course, you can also support us by purchasing from the UK Column shop. And we always like to point out that we have Clive de Gaulle health products, and we do make a small percentage when we sell those products through our shop. Now, the key bit about the UK column information is that the news goes out for everybody to see, and we do that because we hope that people will share the information through the platforms. Facebook, not particularly friendly to UK column. YouTube has got us banned still, but by putting the information out on other channels, you can help us a great deal. Now, just a couple of adverts. Friday the 18th through Saturday the 19th of July, Larling, I think that's Suffolk actually. We've got the Thetford Truth and Freedom Beer Festival. So that's really a mixture of people getting together to socialise, but with also live music and some guest speakers talking about what's really happening in the country. And there's a campsite and camp pitches available in support of that.
In Norfolk.
Sorry, thank you very much. I was close at Norfolk, I beg your pardon.
Near enough.
To people who are local. And of course, this is the very thing we can expect to see the government trying to clamp down on in the future, because anybody telling the truth is a danger to Keir Starmer and his Labour government. Now, tomorrow we've got an interview going out, which is Charles Mallett talking to Dr. Liz Evans, and that's on how the grip of the pharmaceutical industry, let's just bring that on screen, has squeezed discernment and compassion from the modern Western medicine, and importantly, what can be done about it. So do have a look for that, as that will be a very interesting interview at 1 o'clock tomorrow. Now, I'm also going to say I do not have a slide, and of course I should do, for the UK column on location event at the beginning of April. And we do still have some tickets available, but we're saying to the audience that if you're thinking, shall I go or not, you need to get online and buy those tickets because there are a few left. We want as many people to go, but it's up to you. Make that decision and come. We are very sure you're going to have a lot of fun from being there and socializing with other people, listening to the speakers, and also, of course, in the evening, being able to socialize with the UK column team. So we'd love to see you. Please do come and join us, and details of that event, on location event, are on the UK column website. Diane, let's turn to you, because you've been very busy over the last few days, mixing with a range of other people who are also now waking up to the fact something's badly wrong in the country. Where have you been?
Yes, thanks, Brian, and hello, Ben, and welcome to Yobes. It's great to have you here. I just returned from a few different events. On Sunday, I returned from a literary festival in Keswick, which is in the Lake District, at an event called Words by the Water, which is an annual literary festival held at a place called Theatre by the Lake. I have some silent videos and some photos that I took while I was there, just to kind of show you what it was like. I know the news is really heavy today, as it always is, but I thought maybe showing some slides of what it was like in the beautiful city of Keswick might help a bit. So these are just first of all, some photos of me walking around the town, just a lovely town center. It was a sunny morning on Saturday morning, so it was nice to get out. There's the cheese shop, which is important if you like cheese, as I do. This was from the bookshop, seeing a bibliophobic person. This was one of the bookstores in Keswick that sponsored the event. So I just kind of walked through past that in the city as well. Some little shopping there that I happened to do on the side, some nice little things to look at, the beautiful mountains and the surroundings as well. Just a great place to be. This is leading up to the Theatre by the Lake on my walk from the town center where I stayed. And we also went to the Castlerigg Stone Circle, which is thought to have been constructed around 3000 BC. So there's just a couple of photos I took from there. Here's also some photos that I've got from some videos I took of the issue surrounding the festival. So there's a park around there, set on the lake. If we can start the next video, we can see what that looks like. And then I'll just start to talk about some of these sessions. Some of them were beautiful words that I just heard. And I'll cover some of the nice ones before I get into some of the more serious issues that were raised at the festival. Hilary Bratt from the Bratt Travel Guides was there. She did a session called Adventures in Travel and Publishing. If you are a reader of travel books, as I am, she wrote one of the original series of guidebooks that is popular She started that in the 1970s. One of the interesting things that she said is that it's actually safer to travel to dangerous places as a woman compared to being a man, because women can play the vulnerability card if it's needed, if it really is dangerous. Another one that was really nice was Philip Marsden. He did a book called Under a Metal Sky, and his session was called A Journey Through Rocks. And he discussed from this description of the session, he discussed his revelatory journey from the tin mines of Cornwall to the gold mountains of Georgia in search of the substances that has shaped our imagination and imperiled our very existence. So I just enjoyed the time thinking about the land and enjoyed his beautiful words when he was reading from his book. I also went to a murder mystery, which was interactive, which I was not expecting to have to solve the mystery, but it was done by sort of a comedy acting team called Highly Suspect. And the basis of it was Chief Inspector Scott Lanyard, if you see what they did there, has been found shot, stabbed, and strangled inside a locked room. And we had to work in groups to kind of decide who we thought caused the two murders. And it was interesting because it sort of made me think about what a book is, because we were sort of writing this book in real time. And, we were wondering, do they change whodunit as when it's played in different places around the country? It's interesting to note that I only went to one session that didn't mention Trump in some way. So it made me wonder, was I really in England or was I in an American book festival? But it was interesting to see how some of these larger issues, including Trump and many others that happening around the world, were embedded both in the books that I heard the authors talk about, as well as the questions that people ask the authors. So now if I get into some of the more serious issues, Mike Berners-Lee was one of the talks that was there. He wrote a book called There Is No Planet B and the Climate of Truth. His brother, if you are internet familiar, as I am, Sir Tim Berners-Lee is his brother, who is known as so-called the inventor of the World Wide Web. Basically, he wrote the HTTP protocol that makes the internet work. And his session description says, we have the technology we need for a clean and healthy future, so why are we still accelerating into a polycrisis of environmental and social strife? So we can see where he is on the climate change issue. One of the most remarkable things that he said was that The Guardian is the most reliable source of information that we can find when it comes to news. Going on from there, I heard George Monbiot, who is a climate activist and a journalist. He wrote a book called The Invisible Doctrine, and you can tell he's very left-wing in his political views. He called Trump fascist, and we can have discussions about what that actually means. He talks about the rise of the far right. There was a question from the audience about whether the far left or left Labor government is really attacking the poor, and you can start to feel that people are angry about what they got. But we have to ask, why do people expect something different from Labor after what we've seen from Tony Blair? One of the interesting things that happened at this session was Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion activists were in the audience, and they started asking questions more like statements. They just kept talking and talking, and other people in the audience were heckling them to stop talking. We couldn't figure out what the question was, but they wouldn't stop. And if we can put the next slide on the screen, this was given to us when we went to have a drink in the cafe after the talk, and we can see in the slide it talks about Just Stop Oil. 1.5 degrees Celsius is dead. Our leaders failed us, and so on. It kind of goes into this whole thing. It's a QR code you can scan to learn about Just Stop Oil. And that was all very interesting to see. Another book that I heard about was called Food Fight. This is the one that I actually purchased, the only one I purchased, because it had some really interesting things that were raised from it. And it's very confusing. It's got an endorsement by Professor Devi Sridhar on the front cover. So some of our viewers will remember Professor Sridhar from the COVID era and what she tried to do to people. I was first a little bit encouraged by what he said, but also confused, because he was talking about the corporations involved in big food and the terrible effect that their ultra-processed foods have on human health. He talked about their relationships to BlackRock and their concern about the environmental social governance scores. On page 147, he mentions multi-stakeholderism, as he called it. He said it's the latest vogue, a form of public-private partnership popularized by the World Economic Forum, in which the door is flung wide open for any organization to participate. The big tent sounds democratic, but it's really an illusion, a mirage, one more step towards the privatization of global governance. And he goes on and talks about the UN. But if you read the back cover of his book, he has actually been involved in UN agencies for several years. He's a member of the International Food Policy Research Institute. he believes the food system is driving the climate crisis, according to the book. And as we can see when we look at this website of this institute, they are very much active in UN events, such as just this month, the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. And we see on the website that this is involved in the Sustainable Development Goals. We see our familiar little SDG colorful wheel there. He also has a book that's called Decolonize, a chapter called Decolonize within his book, which I will come back to decolonization a bit later in the news. And you can see that he believes that nutrition is related to decolonization and social justice and so on. I have a little bit more to cover about decolonization, and I will come back to that later in the news, Brian.
Thank you. There's two aspects to what you've just covered there, because you've taken us away, admittedly, into a very beautiful part of the country. And that's just lovely to see. Not often we see just nice scenes on mainstream media, but interesting that under the surface, a lot of people working together, many of them from academic, literary backgrounds, in order to challenge what's happening. So I was really fascinated by your report, and it's lovely to understand that, yes, there are people out there who are challenging what's going on,
but have also been co-opted in some way. Because what you're talking about is people who are rightly concerned about things like the food system. They've actually identified some of the issues, people like BlackRock, for example, but then politically they're expecting the system to come in and fix things when it just fundamentally won't. So they're right on about half of it, but wrong on the rest. And you get people like George Monbiot, etc., getting in there and confusing things. So yeah, interesting, very interesting report, Diane. Thank you. Right, I'm going to have a quick look. We just talked earlier about global capital and how it's influencing our political system, and how that is going right the way down to where the shovels hit the ground at a local level. And I'm going to introduce you now to an organisation called Key Cities, who are key protagonists in that part of the agenda. Let's hear about Key Cities.
Key Cities is a really important and influential network for urban areas in the UK.
We came together 10 years ago, and I think we've gradually crept onto the government's agenda.
We've grown in scale and size, and we've got a really important lobbying role in terms of our relationship with government.
We're collaborative. I mean, that's the main thing. I mean, in local government anyway,
in terms of the work that we do together to educate and inform and share good practice across local government in the whole of the UK.
There's 28 of us in the gang, and we've got common cause, common agendas, common problems. And obviously what's really exciting about local government is that we have individual solutions.
The network's got a really important role to play in the discussion on devolution. And what we can actually do is help inform government policy going forward.
We can be trusted to deliver, we can be trusted to innovate, we can be trusted to make a difference.
Key Cities has grown. Peter Box, my predecessor, did an awful lot of work in terms of bringing new councils into the area. And I'd like to see that continue and develop as we go along, because there are a lot of urban areas who are not members yet of the actual network. I'm sure would benefit from being part of it.
Incredible film clip, Ben. I did have the advantage of seeing that before the news. So just incredible to see those people. And you correct me here, Ben. My take on it is some of them are innocents. They are lambs to the slaughter, but others know exactly what they're doing. And I'm very interested to see Plymouth Labour leader Tudor Evans speaking there, because, of course, many years ago, Common Purpose, the political charity, absolutely at work in Plymouth, essentially reframing people. And he uses the expression in this video, common cause. He also talks about a gang of people who are going to presumably tell people on the street what they should be doing. But these people have no idea that every time they're involved with some sort of training or collaborative scheme at government level, they are themselves coming under this applied behavioral psychology. So I found that one of the most frightening video clips that I think we've shown on the news for some time, because those people, the bulk of them, had no idea what they're involved in and what the government is trying to get in as its wider political agenda.
Exactly. And this is a crucial national network where, to use the phrase again, the shovels meet the ground, right? You get local communities, local cities out in the counties, implementing the innovation agenda ultimately, right? So we can see here that there are 24 cities in this network. They've been around for 10 years, not a new thing, right? But it's come to my attention recently. And you can see at the bottom there, it's all about delivering innovative solutions for the challenges that we face. Innovation, yeah. Generally going to be around energy systems, food systems, implementing the kind of technologies that we've been talking about earlier from organisations like Systemic and Quadrature Capital, right? So we've mentioned Tudor Evans, leader of Plymouth Council, clearly a central figure in this. They've actually just issued this report on the waterfront, which talks about the importance of the port cities in transforming the UK. And you can see the lighthouse on the cover there, same as you can see over Brian's shoulder today on the news.
Ben, we can see the ego is what we can see in that taking a selfie of himself in front of cities in Parliament. Ego, power and ego demonstrated on the camera.
Yeah, 100%. And net zero figures very high on their agenda, obviously, as you can see, local partnerships to drive net zero innovation. I don't know if these people have been on an apolitical reframing course, but they're certainly the target for it, right? So this is where what apolitical are doing meets the local cities, who's running it. I won't go into all the detail, but you can see one of them. There's an old face there. Who's that? That's Charles Clarke, former Home Secretary under Blair, who actually tendered his resignation in 2006 after it emerged that 1,000 foreign prisoners, including people who'd been convicted for manslaughter and committing sex offences against children, had been released without being considered for deportation. And Blair refused to accept his resignation. That's not a resigning issue. And he's now doing this. And then importantly, Lord Raj Lumba, CBE, who is the chair, as I understand it. Actually, no, he's not. Chris White's the chair, but I think Lumba has been at some point in the future. And this guy's fascinating. This is a Blair-era appointee to the Lords, made his money in the rag trade. And importantly, he's got something running in the background called the Lumba Foundation. When we go to the Lumba Foundation, what do we see on the front page? Oh, my goodness, look, it's Tony Blair hovering in the background, the hidden hand himself. And who else is on the board here as well? And we can't go into all the detail on this, but I think this is just to give you a little bit of a taster of who sits behind the transformation agenda running across the country. It's people like Blair, and it's also all of these people. So Cherie Blair, who's actually the president of this charity, but also David Cameron and Nick Clegg, so the Condemn Coalition, Baroness Jay, who is the daughter of James Callaghan, former leader of the House of Lords, Laura Bush. What's she doing here? You know, Paul Kagame, who's the president of Rwanda. Big connections to Rwanda. I've got to understand that a bit better. He's basically a dictator, right? Yoko Ono, Richard Branson, he gets about, Joanna Lumley, and then Countess Mountbatten, who is very close to the late Prince Philip. I think she's put it like that. Yeah, so you've got UK, international, political class, billionaires, members of the royal family hovering around the common purpose linked networks seeking to radically reshape and transform British society.
The people really driving the political agenda. And just before we finish on this segment, I'll say that many years ago, when Prime Minister Tony Blair came to Plymouth in order to see the City Council's city development plans, the regeneration supposedly of the city, it was pointed out that people in various parts of the city were against the plans. And Tony Blair was stated in the meeting that the council had been given special powers and they should use them. And the strong inference was to squash any dissent to the central government political policy coming in. A lot more to talk on this, Ben, but thank you very much for taking us through that.
And one final key point on it, though, which actually leads quite neatly into what Diane's going to cover next, which is that this is also very heavily linked into the university system. So all of these cities around the UK, you've got political leadership, but then also academic leadership as well. And as we know, the universities are in a real mess.
Okay, thank you for that, Ben. Diane, let's bring you back in to get deeper into the type of agendas that are being used against us. I'll say we've just stolen a little bit of your time in that segment, but carry on through yours because this is very important what you've got to cover.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Yeah, it was really interesting just to go back a little bit to the book festival, because this also led me to think about this what I'm going to cover now. There were a couple of sessions that talked about decolonization. One was by Lucy Mangan, who is a Guardian TV critic, and her session was called How Reading Shapes Our Lives. And she talked about her book called Bookish and about her books of love, her love of books, love of libraries, and how when she first experienced a university library, she was really excited about the fact that it was all there. So I asked what ended up being the last question in the session, and what did she think about decolonization in university libraries? And she didn't know what it was. So I said it's actually the process of changing language in library catalogs to make it less offensive, the removal of items written by straight colonialist white men, for example, to make room for more diverse authors. And she admitted that she was in the minority, agreeing with me, saying that this wasn't a good thing, which may not be good for her relationship with The Guardian. But when she said that, it actually generated a round of applause in the audience, which was really great to hear. And people sitting near me told me at the end that I was on the right side of history after I explained that this was part of my cancellation from academia and librarianship because I opposed it. There was another session by a man called Jack Ashby, who is the assistant director of the Museum of Zoology at Cambridge. According to his Blue Sky profile, his pronouns are he, him, so that's important to note. He said that less than 1% of collections are on display in the world's natural history museums. So it sounded interesting to see, what else we could do to have more specimens and so on to be shown in natural history. But actually, the direction that it took was a little bit different, because he started to talk about how it's a problem that most of the specimens on display at natural history museums were males. And he suggested that maybe having more female specimens on display would help smash the patriarchy, which he actually said on the slide. He talked about social justice issues and how we need to be more diverse and inclusive, and that we need less Darwin or white men and more of the people who did the work who might not be white men. So I asked him a question. I said, well, since you said in your talk that 0.4% of the world's species are mammals, why is it so important to worry about how humans are represented diversely in natural history museums, given that humans would be even less than 0.4% of all the species in the world, and that maybe they should be more concerned, for example, about the diversity of the insect species that were on display? And his response was that when people of different backgrounds come into natural history museums, such as his at Cambridge, they don't feel represented or included. And so I went to that museum's website, and it has, for example, if you want to go there on the 22nd of March, they have a Pride in Nature LGBTQ plus tour, if you want to hear about LGBTQ plus communities within nature. So this made me think a lot more about all of the government waste that's going on in academic and settings and so on. We have, for example, James Lindsay, who has been interviewed twice on UK Column, and he wrote this paper as part of what was called the Grievance Studies Affair with other previous former academics, I guess you could say, by writing fabricated papers that were still accepted and published in academic journals. And here's one example of one of their fake papers that he was a co-author on, called The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct. This was, as we know, a fake paper, as were many others that he wrote at the time, but there are some other ones here that I want to cover that are actually real and tie in with this agenda that was covered, for example, at this Natural History Museum and many more. I found this one on a Substack post by Stephen Hayward. The post on Substack says that the Trump crusade to punish universities hasn't gone far enough. And that's because he found this paper. The title is probably the most woke paper I've ever heard of, which is saying something. The title is Queer Canine Becomings, Lesbian Feminist Cyborg Politics and Interspecies Intimacies in Ecologies of Love and Violence, written by Chloe Diamond Lenow. It is in the Journal of Lesbian Studies, and it was just published online on the 8th of March. I won't read you the entire abstract. You can go look it up if you want to, but it starts out by saying this article offers a queer lesbian feminist analysis attuned to lesbian, queer, trans, canine relationalities. Specifically, the article places queer and lesbian ecofeminism in conversation, et cetera, et cetera. I'll spare you the rest of it. So going into America, so that was also an American author, but one of the things that Musk and Trump has been doing, as you know, through the DOGE government efficiency issues and so on, one of the things that they have done recently is limited the federal spending of government credit cards to a $1 credit limit for 30 days. So thank you to the viewer who sent this to us a few days ago. So I looked at a particular example. One of the things that's been circulating around social media is that one of these was a $600,000 grant, which was given to a university to study what they call studying menstruation issues, including in trans men. So I wanted to look at the original grant to see if that was really what they were doing. And it looks like what they're doing is actually looking at the products that are involved in feminine hygiene of things that women use during their periods. Yes, women and girls again. But it did say in the abstract for the grant, it is also important to recognize that transgender men and people with masculine gender identities, intersex and non-binary persons may also menstruate. So not only trans men, but anyone who menstruates. Back in the UK, this was reported last week by The Telegraph that Shakespeare's birthplace is going to be decolonized. So we have to, I guess, destroy the history of one of the greatest authors that have ever existed in our country. So I traced this back to a 2022 academic blog post from the National Center for Academic and Cultural Exchange. There was a PhD project called Decolonizing the Shakespeare Birthplace, Trust Collections as an Inside Outsider, a perspective on collaborative research, by someone called Helen Hopkins at Birmingham City University. This was funded by the UK government as part of a larger doctoral training program, which is meant to do three principal things to recognize the role Shakespeare has been forced to play in establishing and upholding imperialistic narratives of cultural supremacy, to purge the Shakespeare birthplace trust interpretative policies and brand narratives of Anglocentric and colonialist thought, and to institute new communicative strategies to address societal inequities that are embedded in imperialism and associated with Shakespeare's global cultural status. Another grant that I found that is funded by the UK government is also from Birmingham City University. There's an entire database you can search yourself. This one that I found is called The Europe That Gay Porn Built. This is 841,830 pounds running from November 2023 to October 2027. Asking the question, the very important question, how did the growing transnational circulation of gay male erotica and porn magazines in post-war Europe contribute to the development of a shared identity and a sense of belonging among European gay men? And one that's worth even more money is over £1 million, 1,254,813 pounds, running from September of 2024 to September to 2027. This one is called Inclusive History. According to a press release on the Royal Holloway University of London's website, this money will enable the university to embed 5 postdocs with its partners over 2 years to research case studies that center around the voice, agency, and contribution of traditionally marginalized groups to the struggle for rights and representation. So I have a quick video here from a lecturer at Royal Holloway talking about equality, diversity, and inclusivity. Let's see what she had to say.
Oh, my name is Dr. Shamima Akhtar and I'm a lecturer in the Department of History here at Royal Holloway. So in addition to teaching here at Royal Holloway, I'm also the EDI lead for the department, which stands for Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity. Now, why is EDI important? Why does it matter for history and for historians and you as students? Well, you may not know this, but the Royal Historical Society, they published a report in 2018 called the Race Report, and this was a survey of undergraduate history in the UK, and they found that 94% of all staff at university at teaching history were white, and of this 6%, only 0.5% were black. And when it came to students, again, they found that whilst a quarter of UK's population study at undergraduate level degrees across the UK, only a small proportion of them do history, and then an even smaller proportion of them are BME. So some of the questions that you kind of might find yourself asking when you come to do a course at Royal Holloway is, why is my campus so white? Why is my curriculum so white? And as the EDI lead for the department, these are some of the things that we can talk through. We have schemes such as a BME mentorship scheme. We have a seminar series that highlights kind of people of colour doing history. We have all sorts of initiatives for you to get involved with if you are interested at all in these kind of conversations about race, ethnicity and equalities.
So it would appear as though history needs to be more inclusive to include more people that are not largely representative of the majority of the population of the UK, which is where this university is located. And also she was wrong. She said equality, but of course that should be equity, which we know at the UK column are two very different things. And inclusivity versus inclusion. So again, she can't even use the right terminology, and she didn't seem terribly sure about she was telling us anyway, even though she's apparently the lead for her area. Just as an and finally on the segment, I have one this is from Sweden from a couple of years ago, but I just thought this one was really interesting as well. The title is Who's Afraid of the Vulnerable Terrorist? Framing Violent Jihadists' Life and Intimate Relationships. This article looks at a sample of academic articles in the field of terrorism studies and international relations to explore the ways in which marriage, sexual activity, and close relationships in jihadist groups are framed, imagined, and investigated using the learnings of queer scholarship. So there's your into the segment. I just wanted to kind of start to show some of the ridiculous things that are being funded in our universities. And I think the British taxpayers need to know exactly where their money is going, Brian.
Diane, thank you very much for that segment. Immensely important, because this is the agenda that is going to finally destroy this country unless we stop it with spades at ground level. And a lot of people, I think, see it and just think it's silly nonsense, but this is the stuff that destroys minds, and particularly the minds of our children. Let's leave it there. I'm going to say, Diane, Jobst and Ben, thank you very much for joining me today. For people who are full-time supporters of UK Column, there will be UK Column Extra in a few moments, and we'll be discussing more in more detail the main points that we've covered in the news today. But thank you, wherever you are in the world, for joining us, and thank you so much to everybody who supports the UK Column. We will be back at the same time on Wednesday for UK Column News Extra few minutes. Bye-bye.